She needs that
Yeah.
affirmation,
Yeah.
and I will not let go until she makes me let go.
Yeah,
Because
that's-
I want her to know of my affirmation and my physical connection with her that's real and it's loving and appropriate.
Yes.
And it is so important.
Welcome to the Focus on the Family broadcast, helping families thrive.
Well, welcome back to the program.
Thank you so
yeah,
much.
Thanks for having us.
Let's start here. Let's start with a recap. What is going on in a teenager's brain? You compare it to scaffolding, which is polite. So what is happening there? What's going on?
Well, it's interesting. For 17 years, I worked with youth. I did parenting seminars, and obviously I knew it'll be different when I am a parent of a teen myself. I always knew that. So when we started entering into those years of having our own teenage girls, we began to do research, and what we found was just mind-boggling. I mean, it literally changed everything. It was a game changer. And so what we discovered, and for years we would just say, okay, yeah, raging hormones, testosterone, all of this is happening, and it's going to create this erratic behavior in your teen. Well, what we discovered through researching neuroscience is that there is a whole pruning that's happening neurologically in an adolescent's brain. And this pruning, which is what it's called, it's arborization, there's this pruning back and there's a specialization that's happening in the brain. And as this process takes place, it literally creates chaos. So what's fascinating is, have you ever had a house remodel of some sort? Your kitchen.
I don't
your
want to talk
bathroom.
about it.
You don't want to talk about it.
They're never on time or on budget.
No, and it's a mess. It's there's starts and stops. Sometimes the electricity is on. Sometimes you have to turn it off. Sometimes you have the plumbing. Sometimes it's off. The same can be true in an adolescent as their brains are being rewired and specialized. And so the research that we found literally is changing how we parent our teens every single day, because what we know and what we discovered impacts not only how they behave, but how we parent. And so that's what we're excited about in this resource, because it's not just something that we're trying to put out there saying, hey, we figured all this out. We have chapter after chapter where we're saying, try this today. Based on this physical reality, based on what's happening, we can have greater compassion, greater understanding, and we can parent better based on this information.
Well, let's get into some of those examples where you can help your teen through some of those changes. What are those, what are those symptoms, and then how can a parent recognize that, and what are the triggers for us as parents to do it differently?
Those are great questions, Jim. I think it's helpful to use the metaphor of a remodeling as we look at each of these individual examples, because it kind of encourages us to put the proverbial hard hat on. Because if you're in a construction zone, you know there may be some nails exposed or some wires that are not put together. And so it allows you to just step back, look at things, and depersonalize them. For instance, when your teenager says, just leave me alone, think, okay, I got to put my hard hat on here rather than retaliate. When your teenager says, why are you looking at me like that? Understanding that their ability to evaluate facial expressions is radically different than that of an adult helps you to just, again, take a moment to breathe and think, how can I change my behavior? We can't control our teens. I know we all want to, and especially ladies, I'll just say it to you because I'm a recovering control freak as a woman. We cannot control anyone but ourselves. And so as we, under the power of the Holy Spirit, are transformed, our teens are then able to see in us that change, and they are given the chance to change as well.
Speak specifically, though, to be on site, ask, listen, respect, which we pulled out of the book. Don't minimize, empathize, recognize the loss. Elaborate on those, because these are the tools that the listeners, particularly you, Mom, really needs.
One of the things that was really impactful for me was reading that I, as a dad, needed to mourn the loss of that toddler. So I had such great times with my toddlers, and it was so rewarding, so engaging. They're so tender at that time, and there's so much reciprocation. Like, you love them, they love you, they kiss you, your neck, you throw them in the air, and all of that. And for me to recognize as they were they were changing. They were starting to push back. They were starting to get aggressive. They were starting to challenge me, which I wasn't ready for it. I had to mourn the loss of those little princesses. And it was challenging. And I could say I'm not still completely over it. It's still hard.
What's so cool, though, is neurobiologically speaking, those girls come back. They just come back stronger and different. So it's kind of like a tulip. In the winter, the bulb goes down into the ground and you don't see it and you feel like, is it ever going to flower again? And then come the right time, there's this reblossoming, and it's a beautiful, beautiful thing, even for the guys out there. I mean, they may not want to hear they're blossoming, but it's true. I mean, if we're using this analogy of the tulip, because it's not that they're gone forever. It's just so hard when it's underground.
Well, and again, one of the things you speak to is this idea of ask, listen, and respect.
Yes.
When it comes to teenagers, that can be hard because there's so much going on there, the dynamic, and we're not prepared as the construction metaphor.
Yeah.
We want them to act and behave like we do because we see them as bigger, more mature, capable. They've got a pretty strong vocabulary. But you've got to remember it's still under construction.
Right.
So how do you stop and listen and do all the right things when sometimes with the boys at least I'm hearing, how's your day? Good.
Right. We have to stop assuming that we know exactly what's going on inside of them. We assume, we make assumptions, we assess what's going on, and we jump to conclusions based on our own expectations and experiences from our past, just even our upbringing. And so when we're interacting with our teens, we can jump to the conclusions and we're already prescribing. We're making statements, we're correcting, and we feel like we have to correct,
Such a
right?
good point,
We're
babe.
always correcting and adjusting their behavior, and if we're not careful, we're just seen as somebody that our teens want to avoid because we are always prescribing for them what they have to do differently, what they're doing wrong, and it could come across. In fact, there's research that shows that if we're not careful, we could just sound like the siren that's always going off. That
that's
we're always
interesting.
Yeah.
yelling. They're receiving what we're saying as this. We're completely upset with them and we don't like them.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. But let me ask you the trigger there. I'm sure a lot of moms and dads are going, okay, that's true, but
Right.
the behavior is requiring interjection
Yeah.
on my part.
When am I going to
Yes.
And
address
maybe it's
that?
20 times a day. I don't know. So it does
Yeah.
sound like a siren.
But
so
this
what
is-
do you
yeah.
use as a parent as a trigger to say, okay, step back, take a deep breath.
What's so great is you have at your disposal a wonderful tool, and that is the question. Asking, that's why when you said ask, listen, and respect in that order, because the asking, it stimulates the area of the brain that is least mature in a teenager, which is called the prefrontal cortex. Now, a lot of people have heard nowadays that a teen's brain doesn't mature fully till the 20s, and they've heard about this prefrontal cortex, but they haven't heard that in order to help it mature, they can ask questions. Asking a question forces the prefrontal cortex to engage. Think about how Jesus modeled this on earth. He was always asking people crazy questions. Man has been like paralyzed for 38 years, and he says, "Do you want to be well?" Yeah. But we skip to statements. And so we are in the book always bringing back to whenever you can ask a question rather than make a statement. Tell me more about that. Your teenager's ranting and they expect you to say, stop that. Instead, you say, tell me more about it, or why do you think that occurred, or what is, in your opinion, the best solution? They are expecting you to give them the solution. So you asking them to engage their prefrontal cortex, it's like the ace in your hand. It really is. It's hard,
yes.
but it really is key, the question asking.
I'm smiling ear to ear because it's just like the Son of God. He knows how we're
Totally.
created to say,
Yeah.
okay, I'll be there and I'm going to ask a lot of questions because their frontal cortex really needs to develop.
Yes, he was the master.
Isn't that funny? Even for
Yeah.
30 and 40-year-olds,
know.
I just think that's a great picture. In your book, you list 26 of the most common scenarios and expressions that teens use. One of them caught my attention, again, probably because I've got boys, which is, that could be epic. And I think that comes from somebody's life experience between the two of you, or maybe both of you. But what is the story around that could be epic?
Well, what we discovered is that in adolescence and the brain development, there's this hyper-rational thinking. And so a young person, they can assess danger And they even know. I mean, we don't want to write them off and just say, hey, they're being dumb. Their brains are wired in such a way that they can assess danger, and they can basically overestimate. In fact, they would choose to overestimate the fact that this could actually be amazing. Like who cares? I might kill myself, but it outweighs that it might turn out to be incredibly epic. So, I look back and I see my own life, and I remember some guys from the high school football team showed up to this place where I rode motorcycles all the time. And they go, hey, can you take that jump over there? And I remember taking off. I'm like, yeah, wait right there. I cruised off, right?
I can so relate to this.
I opened up my Yamaha 125, sixth gear, wide open, and I hit this huge jump. And I remember being completely way over these guys, where they're looking back and watching me and almost like in unbelief. And I didn't even think about it until as I was starting to descend, and I was thinking, uh-oh, I could die. And I bounced off the ground a few times, and luckily I didn't die.
You stayed on the bike?
Yeah, I stayed on the
See,
bike.
I'm amazed at that. Way to go, man.
I stayed on the bike.
He was epic.
So I think back to those times, and I think these are the kinds of decisions our teens are faced with all the time. Peer pressure does impact them. And when they're around other teens, there's this hyper-rational thinking that happens, and that they do assess. And it's important for us as parents to continue to ask them to think about and to evaluate the consequences, because as we ask the questions, they're thinking, but when they're around a lot of other adolescents, this hyper-rational thinking can get out of control. And even though they know that there can be some serious negatives, they assess it, but they'd rather try to be epic.
Let me go this direction, and I think Jean, particularly my wife, has done a great job with the boys, with developing those friendships that are important. Speak to the importance of good friendships. How involved should parents be when it comes to their kids' friendships? I mean, that is such a fine line and can create such tension in the teen-parent relationship.
Yeah. Again, it's so great how God has written his truth into our bodies. So let me just talk about the biology that's happening with friendship, because I think this is very helpful. God designed us in the adolescent years to develop our social brain. It's being remodeled just like every other portion of the brain. And during this remodel, what happens is that teens' sensitivity to peers increases. This is something we can see neurochemically. It's really exciting for them and terrifying for us, because as parents, we see them sometimes gravitating to people that we are not excited about them hanging out with. Even the people that we are excited about them hanging out with. I know you mentioned before the broadcast started about your wife having a Bible study for your sons. They've tracked with one another for all these years, but it's also a grief to see them want to spend more time with these,
true.
even if we love these people, than they are to us. So it was very helpful for me to understand that God designed their brain to move away from us so that they can ultimately prepare to have their own life and families. That is tough for us to swallow, but so important. So just like in every other chapter, we break things down into what's happening biologically. We call that Bio 101, psychologically, Psych 101, and then spiritually, Faith 101. In this chapter, we talk about the social brain, and then we talk about its implications, because a lot of parents are really afraid of what we'll call peer pressure. But one of the things we discuss in this chapter is that our teens don't suddenly do things just because someone else is doing them. What is inside a teen is hooked by things that are going on outside. So it's always a matter of getting to the heart. What do they believe about friendship? What are they seeing in you? Are you a gossip? Are you negative? Are you a lone ranger and don't develop your friendships? I'm not saying that a parent is the sole source of example, but you are a big one. So in this time of change for our teenagers, we got to evaluate, how are we doing on the friendship front? I know for you gentlemen out there, sometimes it's easy to kind of go at things on your own, but your teenage sons need to see you develop good friends. Your sons need to see you committed to things. And ladies, we've got to be good friends in order for our daughters to grow to be good friends. So obviously the chapter is a lot more than this, but yeah, the teenage friendship issue is such a key thing God uses.
Well, and speak directly to the bad relationships. That the parent with a bit more life experience, obviously more wisdom, can sniff it out. I mean, you're the dad. You've got daughters, so I can't imagine your friendometer is
know what,
probably high paced.
Right. If I could pick their friends, wouldn't that be amazing? You know, as parents, I want to pick them. I want to
but
do
some
it.
parents do feel that they should.
Right. Well, I think there should be involvement, and you should know your kids' friends, and so
influence, not control.
Right.
Influence, not control.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that we try to do is we have their friends over. We invite their friends over. We make sure that we are driving them to wherever they need to go, and we're trying to stay involved and invest. And we ask those questions to engage their prefrontal cortex, where there's wisdom and there's discernment, and where oftentimes it's lacking. So we ask them, what kind of influence is this person having in your life? Is it a positive one? We don't know everything that's happening, but we want to stay involved, and we want to invest, and we want to make sure that we're helping them make wise decisions. Yeah, I would probably X out some of my kids' friends. I'd say, yeah, I don't really care that you're around some of these, but these kids, I don't know how positive they are. Here's something that's heartbreaking, and I think a lot of the listeners can identify with this. Sometimes church can be cliquey. And as a youth pastor over the years, and now watching my girls try to integrate into friendship groups in their high school ministry, it's difficult.
Yeah,
and let's be honest, as adults, adult relationships are difficult. And so it's something we have to work at. It's something that we have to continue to cultivate and mature. But when it comes to our kids, we want to stay involved, and we want to have influence, and we want to ask the questions to make them think. And when needed, we'll say, no, I am not supporting you spending time with this particular person. They still live in our home, and we still need to appropriately lay down boundaries.
So engage it, don't look the
Yes.
other way.
Yeah.
And that's really important, that influence you're talking about.
Yeah, that, some people say, oh, it's a fine line between influence and control, but we have the Holy Spirit. He gives us that discernment. We don't have to, yes, there are hard times in that, but I'm constantly just asking for guidance from the Spirit moment by moment. It's not just to pray in the morning and then go on your merry way. It's like, okay, she just brought up this person that I'm very uncomfortable with. What can I engage with on this that will help her see the reason that I'm uncomfortable? It's a very, it's an ongoing all the time kind of, it's work.
Yeah, and
It's
in that
work.
environment, that's really, where the questioning helps. But how would
Yes.
you approach that? Role play a bit with this.
Yeah.
If, for example, your teen daughter is just spending time with a boy that you feel there's just something concerning you,
Yeah.
what kind of questions would you ask her?
Yeah, well, for instance, one of our daughters got involved at her school with a program where there were a lot of older students. And one of the seniors invited her to go drinking. Our daughter was a freshman at this time. And I was so grateful she told me, but of course I'm freaking out, and I said, well, why do you think this young man asked you to do that?
That was very composed to ask that question. I mean,
Jim, inside, I was like, sorry, did I yell into the mic?
Repeat the
it
question
was-
again, because we're all
Yeah.
lost in our anger. Go ahead.
No, just why do you think he asked you to go with him?
Huh.
And she said, well, I think he thinks that's what's fun. And I said, you're probably right. If, do you know if this person knows God? And she said, I don't think so. So this is a conversation with my 14-year-old. This actually happened, and we just, I tried to stay as calm as possible. Of course, my emotions right on the surface. So I'm not telling you to just be a stone wall, but trying to just go step by step. And finally, she came to the conclusion, you know what I want to do? I want to start praying for him. And I was like, thank you, Lord.
No kidding.
I'm sure not every, and please don't misunderstand me, listeners. We're not in the situation where our kids are just saints and we're, everything's going right. We can certainly share our struggles and heartaches. But in that one moment, it was like, Thank you. Thank you that that one conversation went well, and just trying to hold on to that gratitude for what God enables us to do.
It's a great enabling, too. You're really teaching her. I'm assuming she did not go out with him.
She did not.
At least not at that point.
No, I
And-
tied her to her bed. No, I'm just
Right. Well, that was a good backup plan. Plan
Control, not
B.
influence.
Plan
Yeah.
B was
But
just
it
chains
does.
and
It's giving her the capability to think through the
Right.
circumstance. That's outstanding.
she's
And
going to
that's
be
the
in
goal.
college at some point, and there's going to be people inviting her to do that stuff, and I'm not going to be there. So
Right.
if she has those questions stocked away, where she's, just hoping,
Yeah.
Again, this is all in the Lord's hands. This is not like you have to be perfect parents. That's the thing that,
But I love the question idea. That's great.
Well, we can get real too. I mean, in today's,
That's pretty real.
It's pretty real. There's some difficult things that aren't going as well, and we live in a culture right now that's really accepting of alternative lifestyles, and there's this culture of just acceptance, and I don't understand it to the way our adolescents are being literally pulled into.
Oh, yeah.
And almost to a dividing place in homes. And there's some real challenges that we're facing as parents to engage with and understand, even people within the church that are very open and accepting to levels that I would be uncomfortable with. And we're having to continue to have these conversations and grow ourselves. And that's something that we really, at the heart of all of what we've written, is all about growing and going on this journey and not checking out and challenging ourselves to continue to press in and to trust God and pray like never before, that God would help us gear up for the conversations that we need to have. So
Yeah.
it's a challenge. There are some very difficult things that we are facing that we're having to go back to the drawing board and pray about. And
Yes.
sometimes we don't handle it right and we say the wrong things.
Yes.
And we have to keep growing and doing the best that we can to stay on the same page.
I really appreciate that, because I think that is so true,
Mm-hmm.
especially if your kids are in charter school, public school, private
Oh,
school,
yeah.
even Christian school. I mean, the culture is saturating our children with that kind of open approach to God's design.
Right.
Yeah,
and
any
sexuality
listener
and marriage,
who's out
et cetera.
there is and has a teenager is facing this. It's something that 10, 15 years ago, we didn't even imagine it would be
Yeah.
like this. But even if you're a homeschooling parent and you go to Target and you just look at the advertisements, or you go to the check stand and there's all these flashy images on, magazines, and they're proclaiming lies about gender, about our bodies, about about how we're to operate just on a daily basis with money, and
Well, I
everything
would-
is just yelling at us,
Yeah.
literally yelling.
And one of the difficulties is we need to know the theology
Yes.
of this.
So
When God
true.
has created us, man and woman, He created us in His image. And when you marry, the two shall become one flesh. We've got to really understand the spiritual connotation of that God's very essence is put into us for that purpose, so that we can declare the goodness of God in our physical nature, in our sexuality, emotionally together. The bond of marriage is so much bigger. It's the actual image of God on this earth
Yeah.
for us to see and to experience. And I don't think we do a very good job expressing that to our teenagers who can understand it, and it gives them a framework as to why male and female is so important to the spiritual nature that we're created in.
It's a scary conversation, but I'll tell you, both Jeremy and I our desire is to be a home in which anyone can come and receive love, acceptance, and grace.
Right.
That's difficult sometimes, but we have deliberately opened our home to people that maybe some years ago I never would have imagined being, part, but
yeah.
being able to be that Christian family that says we're not the stereotype.
Yeah.
We're not haters. We are people who love, and we have convictions.
Right.
That is
exactly.
it's a great model for our teenagers, that you can absolutely love people and you can have convictions and follow Christ wholeheartedly without being a hater. It's a great thing for our teenagers to see.
And we need to equip them in that way, and to believe that no one's beyond the reach of God, which I know
Absolutely.
the Lord knows.
Absolutely.
So, Jeremy and Jerusa, this has been a terrific start to the discussion, but we haven't covered all the material I'd like to cover. So let's come back next time and pick up in some of that dynamic of the teen-parent relationship. Can we do it?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Sounds
All right.
great.
Hey, I'm John Fuller, and thanks for watching. Get more info about Focus over here and more from our guests over there, and be sure to subscribe to our channel as well.